When it comes to developments regarding cannabis in Africa, how do we know what's fact versus fiction? And this brings me to the topic of journalistic integrity. And I can think of no one better to discuss this with us than my guest today, Brett Hilton-Barber. He's going to unpack basically his view on how cannabis has been developing in Africa and what to expect in the next coming years, not just for South Africa, but Africa as a whole. Brett, it's awesome to finally have you on for the show. I've been a big admirer of Cannabiz-Africa and the work you've been doing. And I want to just basically get into why you're so passionate about reporting on cannabis news.
I think there are two things, Jeff, and also it's a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for having me on your show. One is that I come from a journalistic hard news background, and nowhere else is there this opportunity in a broad news front where you have the configuration or things coming together from money, health, spirituality, all the things, technology, health, all the things that cannabis involves. There's so many facets to it. And as a journalist, I think what excites me most is that it's all new. So everything that I'm reporting on is new. Nothing's happened like this before. And it's really a privilege to be on the forefront of a whole new sunrise industry that is going to actually have a huge transformative effect on South Africa. And that's the one thing. The other thing is, having covered hard news, it's really nice to be doing good news, hard news for a change, instead of counting bodies and such like.
Absolutely, I can hear you on that point, and it also makes it difficult. It's challenging when it's a nascent industry, and you've got to now verify who are the role players, where is it accurate news. But tell us a bit more about your background as a journalist, because I think a lot of people would appreciate that, because that's what the industry needs: is hard-hitting, accurate, succinct news.
Okay, well, I'm sort of give away my age here. I did my cadet training on the Rand Daily Mail. I think it was in January 1976, was my first taste of journalism. I did 3 years at Rhodes University, did a journalism degree there. And during that time, it was a very transformative time. There were the Soweto riots, there was Steve Biko, very active in the Eastern Cape area. And then I basically went through a journalistic career that involved working primarily in broadcasting for Prime Media. So I was political editor for 702 during the Mandela years. I covered the release of the release of Mandela, the homecoming of the ANC. I met the whole top brass of the exile movement, or the UDF movement at the time. And during that time, I was freelancers for the BBC, Agence France Presse, Deutsche Welle, and really got a taste of how to cover the big news story, because the release of Mandela was big, and all us journalists at the time really learned from the likes of CNN and the BBC being out here, and it upped all our games considerably. And that was where I really got the sort of skill set that I think I have now in understanding how this industry is working. After that, I set up Cape Talk Radio for Prime Media with Mike Wills, and was their program manager, and for a while their acting manager while we were fulfilling our radio license conditions. I worked then for Metropolis, which is Prime Media's internet arm, and helped set up the content strategy for iAfrica, iAfrica.com. And then basically got to the peak of a sort of corporate media place, and then got out of corporate, had my own business doing tourism publishing, and in that I got into a different kind of writing, which is about natural history. I've published bird books, a book on the Kruger Park. I've done 3 books on human origins, and that's brought me into touch with a whole lot of very different, interesting people. And now with my relocation from Cape Town up to Limpopo, Zanin, using my journalistic skills, my interest in cannabis as a plant and as a sector, it's just been a very appropriate post-COVID business to launch. Low on overheads, because I'm living on the farm here. This is a Cannabiz-Africa newsroom. And, the technology today is amazing that, we can be having this conversation, that it's actually, there's so many barriers to communication entry that have dropped. And the one differentiating thing now, with everything being so easily accessible, is to try and stick to a quality point of view of content, or have your content as your differentiating factor.
Yeah, fully agreed. I mean, and that's a good point, because the reason I wanted you on for this discussion as well was, your journalistic work is outstanding, and it comes through from your background as a journalist, a proper journalist. Too often in the cannabis space, we've seen a lot of influencers. Nothing wrong with people promoting and destigmatizing the plant, but we need accurate reporting. We need accurate news. We need to know what's going on in terms of legislative developments in the country. We need to hold people accountable in the industry. We need to hold government accountable and stakeholders accountable to the. We've seen the delays, we've seen the frustrations, and I think your resource is really almost a centralizing form where a lot of people coming together, agreeing with the content. I mean, there's a lot of overlaps in the way we see it as well in terms of driving content forward, getting accurate information out. It's not always very sexy, but I think it's a necessary aspect of the cannabis industry that needs to be, we want to be accountable to accurate information. And I'd rather, like you said, instead of rushing content, put out good content consistently that really just informs correctly, because time is so precious and scarce. And now that with the digital divide, it's just, there's so much digital activity that anyone could be an influencer in the space, and we want to see the right type of information getting into the right hands. So here to bring my next question is, I've seen a lot of press releases, and I'm sure you have as well, that is just a lot of hype, things where these press release companies come out with, we've done the biggest shipment of this, or we are the leading brand of that. How do you go in your methodology discerning between, for lack of a better word, BS type of press releases with a lot of hype to actually fundamentally core information that's being put out and circulated in the media?
It's the old journalistic steadfast sort of thing of you have to have at least two sources to verify that it's actually happening and what is actually happening, preferably three. And yes, the media releases often are very overhyped, but I think we've been quite fortunate in South Africa that the industry is still getting off the ground. There hasn't been that much media release activity, say, compared to what would be happening in the States or Canada, and such like. And I think that hopefully we can train the industry as well as people in the media, the importance of not trying to oversell. And it's tricky because this industry attracts every snake oil salesman from everywhere to whichever way and back again. And, everybody who's in this space is a chancer of sorts. And so there is and that then becomes part of the elements of reporting on the thing. As much as try to get accurate information, what's important for me is to try and get a sense of the personalities, the color, the kind of rock and rollness, the frontier kind of business that cannabis actually is at the moment. So I think it's important to have the integrity of the content on the one hand, but that's often difficult to verify because if Highlands is exporting X amount of kilograms to the Balkans, it's very hard to take it to get independent confirmation on that, and you have to rely on their own sense of credibility, and they know that. I'd say to everybody who I get into an interview with, even if it's a good news interview, at some point I might be fighting with you because my only value right now is that I can't be bought by anybody, and I'm quite fortunate at the moment in that everything is new. So even if it's a fairly sort of dull new trimmer that's on the market or something like that, hey, that wasn't there before. That's interesting now. In 2 years' time, when there is a dozen trimmers, that's new. You can't get away with that as news.
Yeah.
And so we see the concept of news evolving as well. And it's very hard to to look at things in a traditional objective way. And in some sense, that's become meaningless. And I'm finding that the cannabis journalism that we're involved in is much more almost of an advocacy nature. I'm coming from a starting point that I think there should be full adult use legalization. And yes, I'm giving coverage to people who say there shouldn't be. But the filters through which I read things is that I think that's the way it should be going. And I'll report on all sides. But, that gives a different element to journalism where you can't say I'm completely objective, but what I'm trying to be balanced.
Yeah.
So, because objectivity is also a nuanced word. We all look through our own filters at what reality is, and no much more so that in the cannabis space, where you have the same organization, say SAHPRA, who in the eyes of the Black Farmers Association of South Africa is one thing, in the eyes of big pharmaceutical companies, they're another thing. It is the same individual organization, but it's completely different things to different people.
No, precisely. I mean, I take your point on this. It is on that advocacy note and on the bias and the lenses we see through. I mean, even for myself, I mean, I come from a biopharmaceutical kind of background. I'm very much a scientist, you know, in this commercial kind of optimization space with a lot of pharmaceutical clients. And that initially, when I really got active in 2019, maybe, yeah, it was one of, I saw it more from a medicinal standpoint. But as I've been in the industry, it's evolved, and the understanding of botanical medicine will never really fit into a fully westernized single molecule type of product. And it's a kind of a handy thing because you're able to understand the arguments from a SAHPRA in terms of quality or issues and their concerns, and yet you're simultaneously able to look at it and see from the cannabis industry and everyone lobbying from traditional healers through the spectrum, for traditional lobbies, all of it, you're able to start to integrate and understand everyone's point of view, and trying to now get everyone around the same campfire is hopefully what we'll see in 2022, because we need to, and I think the industry is at a size and at a scale where a lot of companies have invested on the medicinal side. A lot want to see a responsible adult use market. And even if we've spoken about this in the past, the biggest markets are responsible adult use in the US states and Canada. And medicinal has its role and function and form, but we cannot overlook the economics of it, which is all the cost is going into medicinal in terms of cost of development, but the revenue streams are in the adult use side. So, but we've always said, you know, like work on the medical. I like to work on the medical because it's my background. If I can get that done, we know that adult use should develop or be more accepted, but both should be pushed simultaneously to get there. We're too many years behind in terms of just the benefits of the plant. The next question I have for you, and this is one maybe that relates to what I've just mentioned, which is, how do you report in a way that, you know, it's hard to report and not alienate one fraction from the, and you know, I do see there are sometimes factions. There's the informal cannabis view, and there's the commercialized cannabis view. I think they do integrate. I think there's a need from both sides that everyone needs to be more accommodating. So commercial entities need to look how to integrate previous growers, previously disadvantaged groups into the structure. And obviously those that treat the plant as sacred need to understand that they're never going to really see the benefits of the plant at full scale unless there's a commercial aspect that joins hands in that regard. How do you go about your process between the informal and the formal side of cannabis and reporting on it?
To start off answering that, Jeff, I think that I want to just highlight something that's completely unique about South Africa. We're the only country in the world that's developed a national cannabis master plan, which means that the whole cannabis vision is beyond party politics or factional politics. It's not that government is bound to any advocacy groups, and basically all the pressure on government is to implement its own policy. So you ask, how do I accommodate the sort of formal and informal sector? It's from that very standpoint to say, hey, we got this national cannabis master plan going forward. It incorporates bringing in growers from the illegal informal markets. It also involves the sort of on the industrial hemp guys on the other side who are kind of, you know, from the Midwestern Rust Belt kind of thing, and who are the antithesis of stoners. And I think that's the way that I try and balance it is just by talking about the important newsworthy developments that affect the industry as a whole. And so I wouldn't be that interested in pure recreational news, stoner kind of news, but I'm interested in how many private cannabis clubs there are. I'm interested in the law pertaining to the use of that. I'm interested in all the stuff that affects everybody, like what is going to be the new driving and smoking legislation. There's a whole lot of new legislation and policy and framework that affects all sides. And by sticking to seeing how this is from a policy perspective and using that as my news filter, that helps me balance the two sides, because there's news across the board, but they're very different markets, consumer markets.
No, good, and absolutely. I mean, I've been enjoying the content, and I definitely think I know a lot of people who enjoy Cannabiz-Africa's content as well. So I'm really just, it's refreshing, you know, to have it had as a resource to recheck my own information, my own research into the industry. It's been invaluable. So I'm a big fan and advocate, so I'm glad you're on. I want to ask you two questions. One on...
Okay. Jeff, before you go on to the next question, you've actually encouraged me to bring out a print publication in the next 2 months, which is basically the archives of Cannabis-Africa, but really properly got into the January, February, March, April timeline thing, so that there will be an online history of the cannabis boom in South Africa, as well as something that's downloadable online. And I'd like to thank you because you gave me that idea.
Awesome. Well, thanks. I mean, your engagements, I always learn from our conversations. It's one way, and I'm so glad to see people coming together, especially the last expo, seeing the industry starting to pull together in the same direction. I think this is what 2022 is about. And on that point, in terms of the two questions I have, what are the big things you want to see happen? Maybe not just only in this year, but the years ahead for South Africa. And then second question to that would be for Africa, the rest of Africa. So let's start with South Africa. What are the big things you see that need to change? Because you have unique insight. You're able to deal with so many different individuals, deal with different stakeholders. What needs to really happen in the next year or two for South Africa?
Okay, I think that the absolute main priority, and I think that all stakeholders in the industry would agree, is we've got to fix the regulatory framework. And the main thing is that the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act and the Medicines Act have to be significantly altered or repealed and replaced with one overarching cannabis law. So I would think that the main priorities is for and I have a sense that the presidency is going to become involved because there's so many different departments. You've got recreational really falling under justice, you've got medicinal falling under health, and you've got hemp falling under agriculture, and none of them are speaking to each other. And so I think priority number one is for the fragmentation on the government side to be overridden by some sort of executive authority who pulls them all into line. And I think from the private sector, you and I are involved in the private sector initiative to try and get the private sector speaking with more of a cohesive voice. And I think the other thing that I feel quite strongly about is that there's been no evidence-based commission or anything really where everybody has had a chance to put, like a Zondo Commission of Inquiry, all the evidence on the table regarding the harms, the benefits, and everything. And so we can craft a proper policy out of that has an economic benefit, but also takes into account submissions made by, say, child welfare through to, animal welfare or to the Vets Association. But there's nowhere in South Africa, in South Africa's past, not in Parliament or anywhere, has there been a time where they've said, right, they've called for public submissions, but something like, and I think Judge Zondo would be the perfect person to lead it now that he's got the state capture inquiry out the way, because he's the guy who actually delivered the Constitutional Court's announcement back in 2018 that cannabis was to be decriminalized. So I'd say that's quite would be a priority, although I don't know to what extent it's on anybody's real radar. I mean, government would have to facilitate that.
Well, it is now, we're putting it out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Commission of Inquiry, the Zondo Cannabis Commission of Inquiry, we would like to see come into reality.
Yeah.
And then I think that from a policy, if government, the regulatory things are out the way, we have an evidence-based policy-making process starting. And then the other thing is an immediate stop to all arrests and cannabis prosecutions, because it's tainting the water right now. Police are using that as leverage for corruption. And, there's an order that's gone out from the National Commissioner to say, hold off on cannabis arrests until there's such time as there's clarity in the law. But the Rastafarian communities say that they're part of the police arrest quota counts. And they're soft targets. The cops know they can bust them for weed at any time. And they're being harassed on a daily basis. And that's poisoning the whole, that's putting government in a very dangerous place, because they're speaking of apartheid police tactics. And there's a danger that cannabis could really, instead of bringing peace, love, and understanding to South Africa, it could actually exacerbate social tensions, and especially in places like the Eastern Cape, lead to fueling of racial tensions. Yeah,
and I'll add something to those points. I mean, it's ridiculous to have a commercialization framework, even though it's mostly medical and CBD, Schedule 0, let's just call them, I would call them foodstuffs for the most part. It's ridiculous to have that disparity between arrests and commercial products in this space. It's been 3 years now of we need to iron it out. It needs to be resolved. It's almost inexcusable to have someone say, well, we didn't know, or, you know, in terms of justice, you know, like we were unaware of the changes in policy. So I think but I think this is why we're driving on the media side. And that's why I'm so thankful for the work you're doing, because it does spread, the word spreads, the understanding spreads. And I think this is kind of what we're trying to drive for Africa. And the point I would add to this for South Africa as well is we need to focus on local economy and not just export as a model. And I think this also is common for Africa, the rest of Africa. But how do you see developments in, let's call it, the Northern African partners? I spoke to someone from Nigeria last night. It's quite interesting to see where that might develop in the future, because there are very hard views in Nigeria, but it's also the largest economy potentially in the space in terms of population. How do you see Africa developing in the course of the next 2 years?
Okay, so I see that there's a very big cannabis divide in Africa. There's certain countries that have embraced cannabis as an economic development model, and those are primarily tobacco-producing countries who've seen their tobacco revenues decline, and they've seen the potential of cannabis, particularly hemp. I think that what we're going to see in the next 2 years is the development of a hemp hub in East Africa, with specifically around Uganda, Rwanda, and Malawi, or Central East Africa, because that's very much where they're focusing their attention, and they're incidentally all starting to go for the 1% THC level for hemp. Whereas in Southern Africa, I think the priority for us, or the development that I'd like to see happening most, is for South Africa and Lesotho to actually start a partnership for a start. To start at the beginning of a regional coordination policy, because I didn't imagine in 5 years' time, what would be very good is if Southern Africa was like the OPEC of outdoor cannabis production, that we could negotiate good producer price agreements with Europe, preferential access, etc. I thought we could even call it DOPIC.
No, fully agreed. I mean, this is the thing. I do see that similar on the 1% in the East African. 1% is kind of the accepted. I think any view on 0.2 or 0.3, even the 0.2 has been smashed completely. So, but it has to be just on so many reasons and so many levels. We've spoken about it. It's been published. The 1% is almost the only obvious result, and then potentially higher in the future. But for now, 1% will at least be something to abate the ridiculous reality of what's going to happen if the 0.2% is enforced or even attempted to be enforced. I know I spoke with NAF's a testing lab not so long ago in December, and we reviewed 840 tests, and it was quite interesting to just see the kind of results that came through that lab. So I think hemp industry will have a hard time just in getting the labs to work in a way with the sampling. So to the last question I have, Brett, in terms of Cannabis Africa, just before we finish off that, I heard the other day something quite interesting, that the African Union is looking to set up a cannabis policy coordination desk, because there are already 8 countries that have legalized cannabis for export. Everything's at different stages of policy development. Everything's, obviously grounded in its own domestic conditions. But that shows at least some thinking, not that we can necessarily expect much out of it, but that it is emerging as a new agricultural / medicinal commodity that will require strategic integration from a regional point of view. Ultimately, Africa should be speaking with one cannabis voice, but we can't speak with one voice on anything else. So I wouldn't. No, fully. I mean, a good example is Uganda. I mean, I spoke to the guys from Together Farmer. They moved 400 kilograms of high THC flower to Germany last year. October, I think it was. So that, again, it shows that there's a lot of synergy, there's a lot of experience from different players, and if we speak with a communal voice, it can just look at South America. They're also starting to integrate within the South American economies. So we need to do the same whilst we're going to fall behind continuously in the global, and this is a global business, and it's a global movement for rights. So they go hand in hand. So for me, fully agreed on that. On to the last one.
There are two templates that we should be looking at very carefully. One is Mexico, in terms of how you bring in the illegal production into the mainstream. And the second is what's happening in Latin America from a regional integration point of view, of how Uruguay is becoming a shipping hub for cannabis in the region. Paraguay has got its own little thing that's developing. I mean, there's all this very interesting stuff that, even though it's not they aren't in an adult use recreational market. There's a remarkable amount of regional coordination, especially around logistics and supply chain developments. And that is where we are sorely lacking at our stage of the evolution of the market.
Yeah, no, fully. I mean, I was in July in Mexico to speak at that one conference, and it's super impressive to see the Colombians, the guys from Uruguay, even the Brazilian side. What's happening in Brazil. Brazil's got a very strong medical regulator in the space, but I know that COVAPRIS, the medical regulator for Mexico, they also have their own views, but just it's an adult use market there, which means there's no avoidance of the reality from, there is that transition away from cartels, the traditional way. They want to formalize the economies. So it will be a process, but they're so closely situated to North America that it's invariable. It's going to be one of the biggest leaders with Colombia going forward. And we need to do the same in Africa. I also feel South Africa and Australia and New Zealand have a very strong potential collaboration to be had as well, because there is a lot of some traditional views on a similar Southern Hemisphere cultivation approach. Technologies, shipping to European countries. Obviously, Australia is more dealing with China on a regular basis, but so are we, to be honest. So it's going to be an interesting divide and development, and we want to see the Southern Hemisphere really start to influence quality into the Northern Hemisphere on what can be grown from a botanical standpoint. To my final question in closing, for 2022, I mean, you've done such a fantastic job last year and before that with Cannabiz-Africa. What are the big plans, or what are you excited about for the upcoming year that you have in the pipeline coming out?
I think that we're looking to do more of the same. On the one hand, is that build the platform, and there's so much news that's going to be happening this next year that I'm reluctant to commit myself other than just trying to stay on top of that. But I think what we're going to see is much more of Cannabiz-Africa going into a much more of a multimedia space. We already have got almost 10,000 followers on various social media platforms on Instagram and Facebook and on the website and that, and the newsletter. And I think getting much more to TV. We have our relationship with the Chiba Craft TV people, Trenton and Linda. So we'll be developing the TV side of the business much more. And then I think that, I'm going into a very interesting space in journalism in my head, which is about kind of skills and empowerment. And I'm realizing that as the whole National Cannabis Master Plan unfolds, the skills that we've developed in developing the digital platform that my designer Mano Romanos has done, we can start getting the provinces in to help them develop their own media platforms. Because if you go to DALRRD's website and look up cannabis, yes, it doesn't prepare you for the nightmare that lies ahead of you if you want to apply for a license. And so we're looking to try and help government departments maybe develop communication strategies that are user interface. So if I'm in Eastern Cape and I want to get a hemp permit, and I laugh every time I think that you have to belong to a hemp permit study research group in order to get a hemp permit in the Eastern Cape. Wow. I mean, that's how hard and complicated it is. You have to be, they've got a study group around it. But if, say, take, for instance, the Eastern Cape, which is probably where I'm going to start trying to work with most, to say, okay, what is the provincial agricultural department involved, or the national department involved in the provincial level? What is cannabis? How do I get a license? What must I have in order to get a license? And so I suppose part of my going forward into 2022 will be continuing the hard news stuff and hopefully breaking some good stories, because I'm getting a bit of an appetite for this now, especially around people who are breaking the law, so flouting it, like we've talked about those high THC beverages being sold in kids' sweet shops. Yeah. But also on the other side, a kind of a skills and training thing, because if this is a sunrise industry that we're going to look at, or a sunshine industry, or whatever you want to call it, that's going to develop over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to affect the Department of Health. I mean, agriculture, justice, never mind trade and industry. It's going to be happening at a number of departments on provincial, regional, national. And I think as a never mind my journalistic hat, but as for my enthusiasm about the industry, I think it'd be really exciting to start getting skills transferred to those government departments in order that they can run their own communication programs, because there's going to have to be a lot of education and awareness and destigmatization. And so part of my journalism, I suppose, is educating the educators.
Fully, and I mean, I support that. I mean, I've often, and this has been a point on DALRRD specifically, like getting in Tabo or Francina, talking specifically about how to go through the permit, the application, the same for Daphne and the team at SAHPRA, like how to go through those stages of explaining it, becoming more open as, you know, not, okay, DALRRD is more government, SAHPRA is more private, but it's one of that involvement and engagement in terms of walking people through the process. I fully, that needs to have happened.
Their commonality, sorry, Jeff, to cut in over you there, is that the differentiating thing that will unite everybody is technology and a digital platform. That is how everybody's going to communicate. That's where Jamaica has based its destigmatization campaign on, is a digital platform that involves fun, knowledge. And I think that that's, if we're seeing cannabis being legalized over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years in South Africa, it's going to be an incredibly interesting, fun ride with a lot of noise and media activity. And there's going to be space for everybody.
Yeah. Fully. No, so thank you. I mean, I can only say thank you. It's been great comments you've put forward here. I look forward to sharing this episode. Thank you for your time. And for anyone who doesn't know, Cannabiz-Africa, it's Cannabiz with a hyphen and a Z on the Cannabiz-Africa. I'll have it in the thumbnail included as well as the link in the video. And the other thing I've been enjoying is watching the Canosphere episodes that the team at Sheba, Trenton, and Linda have been doing with you on Tuesday. So I'm really enjoying that, the consistency that's coming to the space. And thank you for making time for me, Brett. I think so many more people need to be on the website, go through those news articles. It's an amazing archive. So for anyone who's heard about it for the first time, or you've not gone there often enough, you should. And start also including comments. I'm always amazed that there's so few comments on the articles or even on the channel. It's like, ask the questions, because I'm sure we will respond. You know, that's what we want to do, is engage and help the industry move. So thank you again for your time, and have a fantastic 2022.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, and thanks for your time as well. All the best.